Intel is showing some signs of life, and dare we say, even some remote, distant signs of intelligence. No longer does it look like a cold, distant asteroid on a collision course spelling doom. Now, it's actually doing kind of okay with the 270kp that we're reviewing today. With the 250kp that we just reviewed, we didn't say that it's a waste of sand. This, as many of you pointed out in the comments, is the biggest possible compliment that Intel or AMD or NVIDIA could get on this channel. Not a waste of sand. It's our coveted award. In this case, the 250kp we already said was looking a lot better. The 270kp actually is pretty competitive in some specific workloads in an exciting way and an interesting one. The biggest problem is that it's on a dead-end platform. We'll respect your time. We'll give you the TLDR and basically the conclusion right now. The 270kp is a $300 CPU, already a good start. Its performance in our Chromium code compile testing put the 270kp up at the top of the board with a 103-minute result. Most critically, that has it only 2 minutes slower than the AMD 9950X, which commonly costs $500 to $520 right now. To be within error of the more expensive 9950X spells danger for AMD's high-end solution in its desktop platform. The 270kp beat the 14700K finally in this test also, so it's not regressive like it was last time, with a 14% reduction in required compile time. In Puget Suite testing with DaVinci Resolve for video editing work, the 270kp again lands at the top of the chart. In fact, ignoring the 285K with the non-like-for-like higher speed memory, the 270kp is actually now the best performer on this chart in our like-for-like testing. Behind it sits the 9950X 3D, which is over $600 when we can find it available right now. In Blender tile-based rendering, the 270kp is barely behind the 9950X. The 9950X is over $200 more expensive, and yet it only required 7.7% less time to complete the render. But the 270kp isn't always better, like in Photoshop, but more often than not, it is. Gaming also shows promise. AMD maintains a lead with the more expensive 9800X 3D and with the 7800X 3D, which is closer in price to the 270kp when we could find it in stock, but still more expensive. However, despite AMD's lead, Intel is gaining on it, including in tests where we know for a fact that we aren't GPU bound. Intel, we think, has the makings of an AMD 2017 era Ryzen 1000, 2018, 2000 sort of revitalization, where AMD did really well in production workloads and it was just kind of okay in gaming. It was like, if you're gaming only, you would still buy Intel, but if you did other stuff, then AMD started to make a lot more sense. Intel kind of looks like that right now, where the X3D parts are still in the lead for basically every game. But Intel's getting a lot closer. In production, though, the 200 series refresh is actually looking a lot better. Other than platform longevity, we only had one serious complaint about the 270kp that actually is a problem for Intel, and that is that in our single-thread frequency testing, the 270kp underperformed, and it failed to meet Intel's specification and advertised clocks. It's 100 megahertz short of Intel's marketing claims. That's a big swing and a miss that we haven't seen in this testing for years. Either Intel is misrepresenting the capabilities of the CPU, or the combination of the Asus Z890 board plus the CPU result in underperformance that needs to be addressed in a firmware update. Still, in spite of its deficiency against the marketing claims, which is a big separate problem, the CPU actually did overall perform well. The 250kp was a good introduction to the series, but the 270kp is the one that's giving us flashbacks to that Ryzen sort of 1000, 2000 especially era. And our single biggest criticism for Intel with the 270kp is that it's a dead-end socket. You're buying the motherboard. If you're building now and you don't already have this platform, you're buying a board that you are dooming to basically only have the CPU in it. Maybe they put out one more refresh that's a little higher end, but architecturally, there's no indication that they will do another full new-gen architecture on this platform. I'd love to be wrong. There's nothing that indicates that it will go any other way, though, right now. And, you know, if you're listening, Intel, seriously, just if only so that you can say that I'm wrong. I don't even care. I would love to be wrong. Just please, for the next one, make it a platform that has some actual fucking longevity, like AM4. And AM4 is it's like 10 years old now, and they're still kind of going. But even half of that would be a big change from where Intel's been. If you do that, you are taking away my only big complaint. That's the biggest caveat I have. So Intel, please, if you're listening, just I'm sure there's people there who are like, someone shut this guy up. That's the way to do it. Hopefully they do that for the next one. But anyway, the 270kp is still pretty interesting. Overall, we're excited about the direction for Intel with this one. The 250kp, I was like, it's pretty good. It's okay. But this one, just because the production side of things is so compelling in some of these tests, this is one I'm a lot more interested in. So let's get into it. We brought you this video with our brand new wireframe V2 mouse mat on store.gamersnexus.net, also accompanied by our new Micro Slop t-shirt that's on its way to our warehouse right now. These feature a parody Micro Slop logo with a blue screen of death frowny face, warning marks from Event Viewer, and our rendition of Tux the Penguin hidden away, and of course, Micro Slop. So everyone you pass either thinks you work there for now, or they know your thoughts on AI. The wireframe V2 mouse mat on the GN store was made by Andrew on the team in Blender, fully 3D modeled, and then represented in a high-quality mouse mat that you see here. The mat can easily accommodate a keyboard and mouse, has fine detail with the city built of wireframe components for the heatsink, RAM, because let's be honest, it's the only place any of us can get any now, and cooling tubes, and we use a matching blue stitching for anti-fray with a blue rubber underside for some unique GN flair. We modeled these to ridiculous levels of depth in that there are things in the model that you can't even see in the product because we went that deep with it. Like, for example, the springs underneath the switch, underneath the keycap that's represented in the matte surface. Head to store.gamersnexus.net to support our deep dive, independent research content like this directly. All right, so we posted our 250kp review the other day, and that one goes into Intel's Platform Performance Package, or again, for short, Intel's PP package. Or, as one of you in the comments pointed out, it could also be Intel's Platform PP. So that is something we'll leave to discussion in the previous video. I don't really know why, but it seemed like everyone in the comments thought this was just the funniest thing. Like, I'm just saying the objective name of it. It's Intel's PP package. We continually talked about how Intel's PP package performs when Intel doesn't have its PP package out. And when it has it out, it performs better sometimes. And when it doesn't have it out, it doesn't do as well. It's not a big PP package, but at 100 megabytes, you really can't complain. So for whatever reason, I don't know, like the comments are just like, ha ha ha, so funny, and I don't get it. I mean, that's literally what it's called. So anyway, today we are also testing Intel's PP package once again, also for shorter, the triple P, or the 270K PPPP, or the double PP. They have two of them. Anyway, the 250kp video goes over that. We're not doing that again. You can watch that video. If you're going to buy one of these CPUs, you need to know about it. It is software you need to install, and it's separate from the chipset drivers and things like that. So make sure you are aware of how that works. Let's get into some of the pricing roundup and the specs, and then we'll do the review. We'll keep the specs quick. The Ultra 7 270K Plus CPU is a 24-core, 24-thread part with 8 P cores and 16 E cores. As a result, it's running a 40 megabyte L2 cache, so the core count and cache size are both increased from the 265K. The 265K is a 20-core, 20-thread part with 8 P cores and 12 E cores, so Intel has increased E core count by 4, and alongside that, L2 cache is up from 36 megabytes to 40 megabytes. Clock speed is advertised at 5500 megahertz for the 265K, and for both of them, TDP is about the same. It's still at around 250 watts for the 270kp. Advertised clock speed is also 5500 megahertz for the 270kp. We'll quickly check Newegg for some nearby CPU prices. The 270kp is supposed to be a $300 part that launches in a couple days. Other relevant components include the 265K, which is $285 on Newegg now, the AMD R7 9700X AM5 CPU, which installs in a platform with some actual life to it at $296, the 7800XD, which remains one of the best gaming CPUs after the 9800XD, but is now $375 when available, and sometimes $350 from third-party sellers, although those are less trustworthy. That's going to be the closest gaming competition, and that $50 to $75 price increase can be soaked by the fact that, one, it is higher performance in a lot of cases, and two, the motherboard has more than one use, and the RAM can be slower while getting most of the benefit still out of the CPU. There's also the 9900X, which is a $374 part that might be an option for production builds. However, even the $520 9950X is beaten by the 270kp in some of our production tests. With all that out of the way, let's get into the testing. Our first test is for frequency validation, which is to ensure the CPU is working properly and that it's able to hit Intel's advertised targets, and in one case, it wasn't. In an all-core workload with Blender, the 270kp's peak P-core frequency was 5400 MHz. That's below Intel's 5.5 GHz claim, but this part is expected behavior because the CPU is under an all-core workload. The E-core average was 4700 MHz for the 270kp, which exactly matches the advertised claims on the spec sheet. For perspective, the 250kp's P-core peak was about 5100 MHz under this all-core workload, and the 250KP's E-cores ran at 4600 MHz. Adding the 265K for perspective, the preceding Ultra 7 CPU ran at 5200 MHz peak for the P-cores and 4600 MHz peak for the E-cores. Under an all-core load, Intel has boosted the frequency by about 200 MHz P-core and 100 MHz E-core versus the 265K. This chart validates the frequency in a single-threaded workload where the CPUs will reach their maximum boost clocks. Intel fails to achieve its maximum advertised boost here. This is the first objective failure we've seen in this test in a long time now. We reran the test and the results were the same. Intel's CPU is hitting 5400 MHz max single thread per interval under a single threaded workload, but its spec sheet states that the maximum is 5.5 GHz, so it should be 100 MHz higher. The CPU is not performing as advertised, although 100 MHz off the maximum single core or thread boost won't impact results too much. In most cases, it's still not aligned with the product Intel is marketing. There's either an issue in the firmware or with the CPU here. We're using the latest BIOS for the Asus Z890 motherboards that are compatible with these CPUs at the time of launch. The 250KP managed to hit its advertised clocks, but it struggled, so the 270KP seems to be mirroring that behavior, just more extreme. We talked in the 250KP review about how the first two-thirds of the test with 250KP saw it lower than advertised max clock more often than at it, with only the remaining one-third more often at the advertised maximum at the end of the test. We're not sure if the behavior persists with other 270KP CPUs or motherboards, but if it does, Intel would be overselling its CPU's performance. If it doesn't, then likely Asus and Intel need to resolve this for their boards. Just for reference, the 285K was capable of hitting its 5700 MHz maximum advertised boost previously. In Baldur's Gate 3, the 270KP ran at 114 to 115 FPS average, enabling the platform PP didn't do anything for the 270KP triple P entry here. The result has the 270KP tied with AMD's 5700 XDD and behind the 5600 XDD by about 1 FPS average. Intel's lows are technically better than these two AM4 X3D parts, but not in a perceptible way. The 270KP PPP ran 5% higher frame rate than the 250KP with PPP, meaning an extra $100 or a 50% increase in price gets just 5% more performance in this game. And you don't even get more PPs with that. You still only have 2 PPs with both of these CPUs spread across the quadruple P. That should skew disproportionately in production workloads later, but it's not a big jump for gaming so far. The 270KP is also 10.7% ahead of the 265K's 104 FPS average result. Really more of a shame for Intel's most recent 7 Series predecessor than anything else here. The 265K is currently $285, which softens that comparison, but it was around $400 previously. Intel has improved the price and performance of the Ultra 7 with the new one, alongside its Ultra 5 series CPUs we already reviewed, so things are looking positive for Intel right now comparatively. Compared to AMD, other than the AM4 X2D entries that remain ahead, the 7800 X2D is also worth considering. The CPU is currently around $350 from third-party sellers, putting it $50 over the 270KP and 16% ahead by average frame rate with its 133 FPS result. Outer Worlds 2 is next, which is one of our newer tests. In this game and at 1080p, the 270KP ran at 133 FPS average with PPP and 130 FPS average without it, so about a 2% gain from enabling the PP package. The 270KP ends up behind the 9800 X2D, which ran at 139 FPS average and was bested only by the 9850 X2D. Because our 1440p results are also capped at the same frame rate, we already know that we're not GPU bound in this 1080p test. This is one of the situations where Intel ends up a lot closer to the 9800 X2D, which only has a 4.5% lead here with DDR5 6000, although they're tied when the 9850 X2D is on the cheaper and slower DDR5 4800, obviously. The 270KP also finally outpaces Intel's prior 14700K that the 265K sort of replaced, although it regressed by pure performance metrics. It took Intel a full half generation, but they're finally on the path back to increasing performance rather than decreasing it. The 9700X has never been particularly impressive for gaming and is down at 103 FPS average, so the 270KP has a lead of 28.5%. 1440p is next for Outer Worlds 2. In this test, the top results only lose 2 FPS average, which could be variance. And that's for the 9850 X2D. We're not seeing the impact of a GPU bottleneck here yet, which is a good thing for showing CPU scaling. As a result, not much has changed. The 270KP with and without PPP runs at 130 FPS average here, with nothing new to talk about from the 1080p version of this chart. Still, we wanted to at least show a higher resolution to illustrate that, depending on the GPU performance, the results don't necessarily get truncated. Stellaris tests simulation time in the game rather than frame rate, which gives us a better look at performance in a way that impacts real world and not just the frame throughput, meaning if the CPU processes faster, you actually feel that time in real life. The 270KP required 36 seconds to complete the simulation both with and without PPP. There was no change there. That has it about the same level as Intel's prior 1300K flagship, which launched in 2022 2 for $590 to $600 or so. It took Intel about 4 years, but they've now reached the same performance for about half the initial MSRP. However, the 270KP still hasn't reached the performance levels of the 14700K. It is getting closer though, at least. The 9800X3D outperforms the 270KP with a 15% reduction in simulation time required. The 9700X performs about the same as the 270KP. As for CPUs lower down, the 270KP is outperforming Intel's recent 285K and the 7800X3D, and against the same generation 250KP, it benefits from a simulation time reduction of 7.7%. This is one of the games where AMD's AM4X3D CPUs, like the 5800X3D, are lower down the stack, giving Intel a better position than some other games. Finally, against the 265K, the 270KP reduces simulation time by 12.2%. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is also one of our newer tests. At 1080p, the 270KP ran at 238 to 239 FPS average under both test conditions. The 14700K still has a 2% lead over the new 7-class CPU, with the two basically indistinguishable from a user standpoint. The 7800X3D leads at 269 FPS average, or 12.6% in average frame rate. When it's available, this is still a relatively direct price comparison. Lows are also improved. The 9800X2D pushes that further with a lead of 32%, although it's more expensive. Faster memory didn't really help the 285K here, and we don't expect it to change things notably for the 270KP either. The kit we're using already has good timings, which tend to matter more for most games. Against the 250KP, the 270KP is 5.3% improved for average frame rate, and these 9700X is around $300 lately, and is beaten by the 270KP by 11%. The next test moves to 1440p to increase the GPU load. The 270KP ran at 238 FPS average here, so the same as the 1080p result. There's enough distance from the GPU ceiling that it's not affecting CPUs lower down the ranks. The GPU ceiling starts to truncate the 9850X3D and 9800X3D results, so those have come down closer to 270KP with 1440p, even on the 5090. The rest is the same, so we'll move on. Dragon's Dogma 2 is up next. In this one, the 270KP with its PP package performed the same as the 7800X3D. They're within 1 FPS of each other for the average here, with Intel gaining a technical advantage in the lows between the two. The 14700K still leads the Intel 270KP, so the company is still regressive versus its 14 series CPUs. In this case, that lead is 5%, favoring the 14700K. Ahead of that, the 9800X3D at 127 FPS average has a 14% improvement for average FPS. On the 270KP with PPP, the lows improved from the 7800X3D, but are still worse than the 270KP. AMD's older 5800X3D isn't far behind the 270KP, but it is behind, so Intel has at least climbed past AM4's GOAT here. The 270KP also outperforms the 9700X's 88 FPS average by 26%. Against the 250KP with PPP, the 270KP's 111 FPS average gives it a 5% bump. It's not really worth the extra money. It's not even close to worth the extra money. Maybe, though, production benchmarks will change that. As for the PP package, it does seem to be technically doing something here. Both the 270KP and 250KP had gains of a few FPS from enabling it, even though you wouldn't actually feel the PP package as an end user. Cyberpunk 2077 is next, first with medium settings. The 270KP's 176 FPS average puts the CPU just behind the 5700X3D, which had a launch MSRP $50 lower than that of the 270KP. Intel's still playing catch-up with AMD's older AM4 CPUs in this game, but has at least bested its own 14 series CPUs by a meaningful amount this time. The 270KP's 176 FPS average puts it ahead of the 14700K's 162 FPS average by 9%, although in this one, the 265K wasn't regressive as in other benchmarks. The improvement over the 265K is 6.3% here. The chart is helmed by the 9850X3D at 230 FPS average, a 30% lead over the 270KP. Intel still has a lot of ground to gain on AMD's high end, but for now, they're at least getting closer to the CPUs nearer in price. The 7800X3D is an example of that, which has a 12.7% advantage over the 270KP. Now tested with high settings in Cyberpunk 2077, the 270KP held a 165 FPS average and lows at 109 and 94 FPS. This drops slightly from the medium settings test. We didn't see a difference from enabling PvP here. The depth of impact for the 250KP's PP package is also small, at a 1 FPS swing. That's basically margin of error and wouldn't be noticed. CPUs above the 270KP include the 5800X3D, which maintains about a 7 to 8% advantage, and then the 7800X3D at about 11.7% advantage versus the faster of the two 270KP results. After that, the 9800X3D chart tops at 208 FPS average for an improvement on the 270KP of 26%. Below the 270KP, and fortunately for Intel, we find the prior generation i7-14700K. Previously, this CPU is about tied with the 265K, posting little improvement generationally for Intel's 7 lineup. Now we're seeing an uplift of 8.2%. The improvement on the 265K is 7%. AMD's 9700X is pretty far down the charts. Without X3D, AMD just has trouble keeping up with any of the other CPUs here. In F125 at 1080p, the 270KP ran at about 277 to 278 FPS average. We didn't see any change from the platform PP, true for both the 270KP and the 250KP. We're within run-to-run variance for both. The higher of the two results puts AMD's 7800X2D 8.8% ahead of that one. The 9800X2D boosts that further, but also boosts the price, and is 29% improved on the 270KP. Against Intel's prior CPUs, the 270KP outperforms the 285K, so that's good, and also bests the former flagship 1300K. Changing to faster memory had no impact on the 285K in this testing, and we wouldn't expect one on the 270KP in this test either. The 270KP also leads the 14700K by about 10 FPS average, and the 5800X2D by about 18 FPS average. As for the 250KP, spending an extra $100 would boost from 253 FPS to about 278 FPS average, or about 9.8% that you get for that $100 you're spending. And again, production workloads will change that. Starfield is the last for games, with production next. In Starfield, the 270KP ran at 160 FPS average. The PP package is impotent here for the 270KP, with its change within run-to-run variance and error. The 250KP saw slightly more of a change, so is either more receptive due to its lower spec configuration, or just landed on the outer bounds of variance. The 14700K still leads the 270KP, so Intel hasn't beaten its predecessor yet by raw performance. They're close though, and we'd expect the next generation should surpass it, finally. Intel is also driving down power consumption technically at the same time, so they're at least gaining in efficiency. The AMD 7800X3D manages about a 6 to 7 FPS lead over the 270K, with the 9800X3D more meaningfully ahead at a 197 FPS average. Against the 250KP, the 270KP is 6.6% ahead. We're moving to production testing now, where the 270KP should show more of an improvement over the 250KP than, for example, in gaming. Intel has established itself something of a foothold in retaking some of the non-gaming workload top ranks. That's something that we'll see here. Chromium code compile in Windows is next, although not plotted here just to save space for the next round of CPUs. We didn't see a difference, again, with PvP enabled in this one for the 270KP. That mirrors the 250KP testing, where the two entries were about 133 minutes. This test looks at time required to complete the compile, with the 270KP completing the Chromium compile as we tested in 103 minutes. That has it slower than the 9950X by only about 2 minutes, meaning the 9950X completes the work in 1.9% less time, which isn't that big of an advantage for the price of the 9950X CPUs. This is a great result for the 270KP, and actually one of the best out of all the testing we've done so far for these new parts. The 270KP outdoes the 285K by a couple minutes and shortens the compile time on the 14700K's 120-minute result by about 17 minutes for a reduction in time required of 14%. Versus the 250KP's 133-minute result, the 270KP completes the compile in 22.6% less time. AMD's 9700X is pretty far down in this one at 190 minutes. This allows the 270KP to complete the compile in 46% less time required than the 9700X. AMD's 9800X3D and 9850X3D utilize their higher frequencies to outperform the 9700X, but otherwise they don't gain their value back in cost in this test as expected, because the extra cache is really more of a gaming benefit. In Blender rendering with the CPU, where one tile is spawned per thread available, the 270KP performed equally with and without PPP once again. Both the 270KP with its PP package equipped and with it put away required 6.5 minutes to complete the render of one frame from our intro animation. The 9950X did this work in 6 minutes, as did the 9950X3D. Intel is getting close to AMD's 16-core CPUs with these workloads, which is mostly just exciting because we might finally have some competition again in at least this segment. The 285K did the work in 6.7 minutes, so in terms of actual performance, it's really not that different from the 270KP. However, the 285K has been $530 to $600 since launch, lately $530 to $560, and the 270KP should be $300. That's a massive improvement on the 285K's value proposition, and is actually a threat to AMD's 9950X. With one exception being that you could actually put another CPU in the 9950X's motherboard in the future, whereas the 270KP will be in a dead platform, and that is a big advantage for AMD. Either way, as we said in the 250KP review, it looks like Intel is starting to establish a foothold in non-gaming work, just like AMD did back in the Ryzen 1000 and 2000 era. If Intel takes platform longevity more seriously in its next round, then they would be taking away one of the key criticisms of them, and that would be a good thing. As for other results, the 270KP outdoes the 265K's 8-minute render time, completing the work in about 19% less time required. The 14700K is at 8.8 minutes, so this is a decent improvement after the prior relatively stagnant launch. In 7-zip file compression testing, the 270kp completed 183,000 MIPS, or millions of instructions per second. Enabling PPP had it at 181,000 MIPS for the result, meaning the higher result is only 0.9% higher, so the differences we're seeing are just run-to-run variants. They are within error. Taking the higher of the two, the 270kp ends up just behind Intel's 1400K former flagship. The 285K actually benefited from the faster memory here, showing a 2.7% improvement from its baseline result. It's not a big difference, but more than we've seen in a lot of cases. AMD's 9950X CPUs both take the top of the chart without going to Threadripper. As for relevant comparisons, the 270kp outdoes the 14700K's 174K MIPS by 5% and the 265K by 14%. Against the 250kp, the 270kp completes 18% higher MIPS. That's a larger gain than the 3 to 8% improvements we saw in most games between the 270 and 250, but still not a ton for the price increase. AMD's 9700X falls pretty far down the charts here, giving the 270kp a 65% lead over it. The 9900X is about $370 commonly, so about $70 over MSRP for the 270kp, and the 270kp outperforms it by 13%. In decompression testing, the 270kp completed 198.7 thousand MIPS without PPP and 197.3 thousand MIPS with it. So again, these are within variants of each other. We could rerun this even more times and they'd probably keep flipping like this. Taking the higher of the two, the 14700K takes back the lead with a 206,000 MIPS result, or an improvement of 3.6%. Intel is still showing regression in decompression testing here. The 270kp is getting close at least to the 285K and is significantly cheaper. AMD's 16-core CPUs lead these charts, followed by Intel's former 14900K and 13900K flagships, which somehow end up accidentally being their current flagships. So they're still the flagships, but they used to be the flagships too. The 9800X3D and 9850X3D aren't competitive here, and especially not at the price. The CPUs are fine, but the extra cache has never really benefited the production workloads that we benchmark, or most of them anyway. These are more for gaming, at least where you get the value out of them. Against the 250kp PPP, the 270kp is showing a 31% improvement, taking the higher of the two. That's getting more worthwhile, at least, versus the last one. Over the 9700X, the 270kp higher result posts a 52% improvement. Adobe Photoshop tested with the Puget Suite is next. In this one, the 270kp doesn't do as comparatively well as in some of the earlier tests. Still fine, but just not as impressive. The 270kp with and without PPP performed the same. In both situations, it's just behind the 7800X3D and ahead of the 14700K. The 9700X leads the 270kp this time with a 15.7% lead against the 270kp. The 265K, 285K, and 245K were all unimpressive in this test, down below even the 14600K. At least with the 270kp, Intel has surpassed its prior generation 14700K. AM4 X3D CPUs are all at the bottom here, seeing no real benefit from the extra cache. In DaVinci Resolve video editing testing, we saw the 270kp at over 14,000 points for the extended testing with the Puget Suite. This has it just behind the 285K with expensive RAM, which is a good result considering the price of the 285K and the price of the DDR5 8000 memory, and the fact that these scores are functionally identical in performance is also a good thing for the 270kp. The 270kp ends up ahead of the 9950X 3D and 9950X this time. The gain against the 9950X non-3D is 3%, which isn't a huge advantage, but considering the price difference, it matters. Again, our only real complaint against this CPU is that it's on a dead-end platform. If Intel can do a repeat of this launch, but on a platform with some life left in it, they'd be taking away our main criticisms. Improvements over the 265K are also notable, with the prior 7-class CPU down in the 13,000s. As with our 250kp review, we're keeping our power consumption testing relatively straightforward for these reviews. For power testing, we're using an external capture device to serve as an interposer between the power supply and the motherboard. So the PMD2 here is measuring ATX 12V and EPS 12V power, as this board is unconventionally splitting some of its 24-pin power over to the CPU. That's uncommon. We then subtract the GPU slot power via a PCIe slot riser, which intercepts it at the source and pulls from a 4-pin connector that we can split out from power logging instead of ATX 12V. In a Blender all-core workload worst-case scenario, we measured the 270kp at about 284 watts when factoring in the EPS 12V cables and the ATX 12V line. That means we'll have VRM efficiency losses and other miscellaneous ATX 12V components factored in, so it's a little higher. but it's still going to give us a pretty good representation. The CPU package power measured via hardware info is at 230 watts to 251 watts, which matches the advertised TDP of the CPU. For reference, the 250kp pulls significantly lower power at 186 watts via external capture and 130 to 150 watts via software logging. In F125 power consumption testing, we measured peaks for the 270kp at 250 watts during loading sequences to prep the test run. The 270kp measured at 125 to 140 watts during the game itself, with hardware info CPU package power logging the PP package enhanced 270kp, which has a much higher TDP at 176 watts during loading and about 90 to 100 watts during the game. Overall, pretty good. That's it. Right now, Intel is like celebrating. They're opening the champagne in the office, I'm sure, all 12 of them that are left after the layoffs. So the 270kp is at $300. It's pretty competitive with the 950X. It's way better than the 285K. I mean, that CPU was a fucking nightmare. Like their 200 series launch was just awful. We knew they were launching onto a dead-end platform. We got a refresh, so that's good. But that plus the fact that the CPUs were regressive versus the 14 series, it was just bad. It was, and the prices were pretty high too. They were like out of their fucking minds with the $600 CPU thing. They were doing plus or minus $50 sometimes. So this is a lot better direction. The 250kp in particular as a $200 CPU, that's good. Like that, we don't have a lot of $200 computer parts these days that are actually competitive and have silicon in them. So this is a good direction. Unfortunately, as you all know, the RAM pricing is astronomical right now. And so if you want to build a computer, the RAM is taking up probably like 30% of the goddamn budget for the computer or more, depending on how much you need. And that kills it for a lot of people. So budget part, obviously, like $200, it's not budget. You know, we consider that maybe like an $80, $100 CPU. But for the performance you get, the price is relatively good on the $200 250kp. It's just that you lose a lot of that momentum as soon as you hit the memory and as soon as you hit the single use, basically, motherboard that you'd be buying to put it in. Same with the 270kp. But in a vacuum, ignoring the memory pricing right now, because that's a constant. That affects everybody. It affects AMD too. Ignoring that, at least this is the right direction for Intel, and they're looking competitive. I really hope Intel does a repeat of this with a new platform that they will keep. Like, enough of this bullshit. We're going to do like one, maybe two kind of generations on it, and then fuck you, our motherboard partners need more money. Enough of that. I really got to see some longevity from Intel, because with AM4, you know, I think people kind of looked down on the longevity for a while with AM4, because like, well, I don't, if I'm building a new computer, I don't mind buying a new board, especially if there's something like a new PCIe generation, new DDR generation. Sure, makes sense. But then you look at AM4 now, the amount of viewers we have, especially those of you in particular in places like Brazil and China and Taiwan, places like this, we have so many viewers who contact us and thank us for looking at the newer AM4 parts because you have AM4 builds, and it makes a lot more financial sense, according to those of you who've emailed us, to just upgrade in socket. And that's cool. It also reduces e-waste. So even for the people who are more privileged to where you can just buy a whole new computer every time, the longevity, it really matters, especially if your board, when you're done with it, can go secondhand to someone else who gets another 3 years of processors on it. That's awesome. So we need Intel to do that and take away our main complaint. But as far as the 270kp, you know, the conclusion was in the beginning. You already got it. I'm not going to go over it again. The quick version is pretty good in production, much better in gaming than it used to be. X3D is still the best in gaming in most cases, sometimes by a lot, like 30+%, sometimes by not so much, like 6.5%. Now, predictably, AMD probably is going to have a 10 series or something that they'll put in the AM5 platform. So they've got more life yet in theirs, and for sure they're going to launch something and it'll be competitive with these. That's just how it goes. But as far as the 270kp, I'm just happy that this is not another like $400 7 class, like i7, Ultra 7, whatever CPU, and especially happy that it's outperforming their prior $520 to $600 285K. So that is, like, genuinely, this is the most signs of life and market awareness we've seen from Intel in years now, outside of its GPU division, which up until recently seemed to be the only part of Intel that actually understood how people spend money. So yeah, the DRAM stuff's still a mess, unfortunately, but that's gonna be it for this review. So a lot of fun working on these. We had the Noctua case, if you want to check out some other technical testing, that had our new fan testing machine in it for some data. That was really fun. We have the Crimson Desert GPU benchmarks. We got a lot more coming up, but that'll wrap this series because they only had the 2 parts, at least for now. So thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net. We need your help to do this type of content because we are heavily self-funded now, which means audience funded for our testing and for our research deep dives for our investigative pieces. A lot of our, at this point, the majority of our funding comes from the audience. So if you can spare it, we'd appreciate it. There's a donate button in the bottom left. If you don't want to buy anything, you can just send money that way. That takes the lowest cut out of all the services. So, and if you can't, that's fine. Watching the videos is a big help too. So thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and we'll see you all next time.